Hello everyone, I'm Jordan. I'm one of the co-organizers of this meetup, also a developer at Hatch Invest. I guess this is talking about something that's not really, well, sort of related to that, but not strictly related to my work. So this is called Browser Automation, the glue of the New Zealand finance industry. I don't know if anyone had those glue sticks when they're in school. I still have some for some reason. I don't know. I don't use glue sticks. We were talking about this earlier. Anyway, so I want to sort of set the scene a little bit as sort of why this is something I'm kind of looking into. So I use a budget app. It's called YNAB. I don't know if anyone uses that, but it stands for You Need a Budget. And I really like it. It helps me sort of decouple my sort of bank accounts from the sort of envelopes that make up my money. So you kind of have like a social category and little ones for holidays, or you can sort of set goals and sort of track where your money's all going, or most of the mortgage. Yeah, for a tool like that to be useful, it needs to know about all of your sort of bank transactions. And with a tool like YNAB especially, it's more about, it's best to kind of keep it up to date all the time as you go, because if you kind of update it at the end, it's more of an analytics tool where it's sort of meant to be used as something, as you're spending money, to actually see how much do I have left to spend on food this month, or am I going to just like eat noodles for the rest of the month kind of thing. So ideally, yeah, want to keep it up to date as quick as possible. And you can do manual transaction entry. That's totally a thing you can do every time you spend some money. Pop it in there. But it really sucks. I just hate having to type stuff in manually, having to like jump between the like YNAB app on my phone and the bank app. Like, it's a first world problem, but this is something I wanted to solve, of course. So this is a thing I've kind of been solving for many years and many iterations. Basically, at the time I was trying to solve this problem originally, YNAB didn't have a way to sort of link to a New Zealand bank account. And New Zealand banks don't really have any sort of programmatic way to kind of get your own banking data, which was kind of annoying. So it came down to just sort of logging into the bank and downloading a CSV export and sort of uploading that to the budget app. And that's fine. That's a good enough way to access your own banking data. But of course, it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted something that could kind of be a bit more automatic. I didn't want to log in and download statements from each bank account and re-upload them. So, of course, being a developer, I wanted to sort of build my own DIY solution. So this is the first of a few iterations of things I've built for this over the years. The first one has got a really catchy name. It's called ANZ Good Budget Automated Import. I built that around 2017. Basically, Good Budget was a budget app I used to use. It's pretty much like YNAB, but it was cheaper because I didn't want to pay for YNAB at the time. So it uses Ruby code and Selenium. Selenium is like a tool that you often use in your sort of tests, maybe to do some browser automation. But you can just automate anything with it. You can automate, well, anything browser automation related, go in and click some buttons. So in my case, it would log into ANZ, it would click around to each of the bank accounts, click a little button to download a statement, grab the bank statements, clean them up, and then log into the Good Budget website and click around there to sort of import those bank statements. This was a really simple version. It just ran on my computer directly, so all I have to do is run a command and just like type in my password to that, hit enter, and watch it do its thing. So nice and easy. Nice and secure, I guess, because it's not holding my password, I'm typing it into it. So that was cool. But eventually I wanted something else because I changed banks, and I changed budget app as well. I started using YNAB. So I needed a new sync app, of course. So the BNZ website was like a lot more modern than ANZ. It's got sort of used APIs in the background, which is pretty cool. And YNAB also has an API. So I was like, well, that's cool. I can kind of grab some stuff from one API and sort of shove it onto the other one. The YNAB API just lets you sort of import transactions with a web request. So I decided to go with a browser extension this time. Which was kind of cool. I hadn't written a Chrome extension before. And the idea was I kind of logged in to the bank just using their normal sort of authentication methods. The little icon on my sort of browser would come alive and notice that I'm sort of authenticated with a bank, and I'd hit the button, and then it would just kind of inject some JavaScript into their page, hit their API, and then kind of hit the YNAB API and sort of shove those transactions up there. So that worked quite well, and it meant I wasn't trying to sort of mess with the bank's kind of authentication methods. I was just kind of using a browser window that was already open and had a cookie there that I could kind of just authenticate web requests with. So that was cool, and had a little sort of settings UI I could sort of mess with. So this solution worked great for a couple of years. Of course, it wasn't quite good enough for me, because I got sick of like having to remember to go and sync these things up and click the button. So I decided to, I wanted something that would just like run on its own, and just I'd get a notification from the budget app that would say, you've got new transactions to classify. So yeah, I needed a new version again. So this is my sort of current iteration. It's called Budget Sync. Just started in around 2020. And the idea is this one just kind of can sync on its own. That does mean it's got my password. And it also gives me a bit more control over my sort of transaction handling, because I guess it's a Ruby app. I was a bit more comfortable sort of messing around with it, writing more advanced code than I am in JavaScript, at least. And it could support multiple sort of budget apps and banking apps. So if I wanted to kind of, well, I think I did need at this point to talk to sort of KiwiBank and BNZ, because I changed some things around, whatever. So it had a new task to kind of go to 2 different banks, kind of merge all that data together, and then put it up to the budget app. So I don't know if anyone heard my talk last year on Memory Museum. It was another project of mine, but I was getting really into YAML files. So this one uses YAML files for its config, which works well for what I need. Yeah, supports multiple sort of banks or budget apps, as I mentioned. And it just sits there. It runs on a sort of Docker container on my home server multiple times a day. It just kind of logs into the bank as me, and then just grabs all my transactions and throws them up to the budget app. So it's good. It works pretty similar to the previous iterations. For KiwiBank, it just logs in and clicks around and does stuff. For BNZ, it can inject that JavaScript into their page to sort of hit their API and then grab that data out. So works well. And another plug for like specs in personal projects. I never used to do that, but this was an example where it was really handy to have some tests. Even though it is a personal project, it is just me. It was handy to know that I wasn't breaking all my parsing logic for different transaction types, because you get, I can run it with an example of a transaction from that is a weird format or something, and just see how it handles that. So that was cool. The problem is my BNZ integration is currently failing. I think it was detecting that I was sort of screen scraping and being a bot, and it didn't like that, and I didn't really know, or didn't really want to do too much to work around that, given it's kind of, banking, and I don't want to be seen as sort of trying to get around security measures on a bank. And I also switched banks again, and so it meant I was going to have to build yet another automation, and I really didn't want to. So this is kind of me in the last couple of years sort of poking my head up again and going, surely there's got to be a better way than all this browser automation and DIY stuff. So this kind of leads me to sort of a journey to look at sort of another popular sort of budget app and how that works. So I don't know if anyone's heard of Pocketsmith. It's another sort of, I think they're a New Zealand-based company, and they support syncing with a whole bunch of New Zealand banks, which is pretty cool. So all the big banks. And the way they do that is they use a service called Akahu to kind of sync with New Zealand bank accounts. And there's another one called Yodel for international bank accounts. These are great names. So kind of this led me to kind of think a bit more about what is Akahu. So they're a fintech based out of Auckland, and their whole thing is basically about providing an API that sort of lets you, so as a developer, kind of access bank APIs without having to kind of do individual integrations to different banks. You just kind of get all that information, can do whatever you need. So that would be something you could use if you wanted to get your customers' bank transaction data or get their bank statements for some reason. You could integrate with them. and they support all the big banks and also other financial institutions like Hatch and Simplicity and InvestNow and all these kind of things. You can also make a personal app, so like you don't have to, because normally if you go through their process, you have to kind of pay them a bunch of money and you have to have all, your app pen tested and stuff because you're accessing people's bank data. But if it's just your own stuff, they don't really care. You can just kind of access your own banking data through that. So that's pretty cool. But there's always that kind of question of how does it work? And you'll see here in the screenshot, basically, if you're connecting with a bank, you'll need to enter your username and password. And it's really hard to see, but in that screenshot, it's sort of saying for ANZ, you need to provide your username, your password. You need to already be using the mobile app, and you need to provide the PIN that you'd use for the mobile app. So you're kind of initially thinking, there's something, how's this actually working? And they publish this, they're quite open about how it works. So this is from their website and also talking to the team at Akahu. At the moment, there's two methods. First I better say they have two sort of flows. You can either sort of do a one-off flow where you can kind of just provide your username, password, or whatever and get some data once, or maybe if you've got a more sort of permanent integration, you might need to kind of get enduring access, or constant access to someone's transaction history. So most of the time, if you're signing up for a mortgage, you probably don't need their transaction history going forward all the time. But for something like what I'm doing, I would be using this sort of enduring access flow where I need sort of transactions constantly coming in. So the two methods they use are sort of mobile APIs and screen scraping. Mobile API is kind of an interesting approach. Basically, if you've ever sort of used a bank app in New Zealand, you'll know that you often get asked for sort of your username and password the first time you log in, and then your phone is kind of quite convenient and doesn't need to ask you for that in the future. Maybe you do Face ID or Touch ID or something on your phone, but beyond that, it's pretty simple, and it's generally because your phone is storing some sort of token on it, just to kind of get that convenience compared to the web where you've got to sort of type in your password every time. So they're being quite smart here when they're integrating, especially for their enduring flows when they're connecting up to banks. They're just using those same APIs, often pretending to be a device. And the benefit of that is you get to at least sort of track it, and sometimes in the bank you can revoke a device. If you sell your phone or whatever, you can get rid of the old one. So at least if you were concerned that this integration was doing something dodgy, you'd be able to sort of revoke it. But maybe the bank could track it easier if something's going a bit funny. Maybe they have better ways to sort of go, oh, that was this thing called Akahu messing with your money, sending it somewhere else. So that's what they'll use for sort of all the major banks. They'll use mobile APIs, and then the other thing they'll use, just like what I was doing, is just screen scraping. So straight up just logging in as a bank, as you to the bank, using your username and password. And sometimes, depending on not for major banks, but sometimes they will need to store a customer's username and password if you want to have enduring access to their kind of account data. So it's obviously not ideal to think of them sort of having to store people's banking passwords on their systems permanently to kind of give that permanent access. And sometimes also you do need to switch off 2FA. So yeah, this is mostly used for sort of one-off integrations, and some sort of integrations with like companies that don't have mobile APIs they can use. But going forward, they want to use some purpose-built APIs, and we'll sort of talk about those soon. And I guess, so this kind of browser automation thing, you kind of think, okay, that's how Akahu works. And then you kind of look a bit further and you sort of think, oh, you realize that that's how everyone's doing it. It's not just them. So a big example is a thing called Polly, which you might have used to pay for some stuff. It's used on like many big websites like Air New Zealand, NZTA, PB Tech, The Warehouse, and it's generally sort of seen as the free option versus paying with a credit card and having to pay a credit card fee. But you notice if you use the service, it asks for username and password because it's just logging in as you to your bank. They make it sort of look nice, but ultimately they are just logging in as you, clicking a button, making a payment. And the benefit of that, though, I guess, is it provides instant confirmation to the merchant. They get to know, oh yeah, they definitely have enough money, the payment's been made. But ultimately, yeah, you are kind of handing off your password to a third party. Another one I've seen is a thing called alien bank statements, which a lot of credit checking agencies seem to use. I was personally asked to use this for a simplicity mortgage, and they sort of said you can't just provide your bank statements, you've got to use this service. And so it's sort of like, well, I either, I guess, don't get a mortgage with them, or I have to kind of hand off my username and password. And they sort of said, well, just change your password. Like, okay, I guess, but yeah, it sort of still feels a bit icky. But hey, they do use bank level security, which is sort of like, I don't know what that means. I think it's probably just that they use TLS like the bank, but it's sort of like, well, I'd hope every website would use some sort of encryption, in transit. But I don't know, it just doesn't. I always find it funny when companies say bank level security. So yeah, I guess the question is like, what's the risk? Like, what's the problem with this? So I guess the thing to ask here is really just what happens if one of these products did get compromised. So I guess there's kind of a couple of things. There's sort of the credentials themselves. If your username and password that you might use on a bunch of websites, or a bunch of I know some people use they have some insecure weak password they use for everything else, but their banking they use a slightly longer one, and if that's the one that gets leaked and everyone can get into all your different bank accounts, that's not great. Transaction history could get leaked. If one of these providers got compromised in some way, there's a lot of people who I don't think would like having their transaction history sort of published to the world. And obviously there's just the obvious one of just, if someone can log in as you as the bank, they could just take all your money. That's, obviously pretty unfortunate. And the interesting thing with these is sort of banks do have a policy of don't give your password to anyone, and they say that this does include companies like these. And they say basically, if you've used one of these, you should probably change your password. But then at the same time, it's used by PBTech and it's used by NZTA in Air New Zealand. So it's sort of like, how does that work? these really big sort of trusted brands use it. So it's kind of weird when the banks sort of say, oh, don't use that. Why would you use that? So it's a bit of an odd one. And there hasn't been any major incidents with these, but there's always that risk, right? So they've kind of got this good sort of sense of trust there because of these big brands and things, but it's still a bit weird that they're sort of taking everyone's passwords. So I guess I want to talk a bit more about sort of the future and what's sort of changing in this space going forward. So you might have seen, depending on what you've used, that there's a service called Online FPOS, which is a good alternative to Poly. And this one's kind of cool. I haven't personally used it because even though I have a lot of different accounts with different banks, none of them support this. But you just kind of enter your phone number, and then you'll get like a prompt on your phone. It will say, do you want to kind of approve this payment to whatever company? And I think just like something like Poly, it's kind of cheap for the merchant to use, so they're not having to pay the percentage-based credit card fees. They're paying a lot less. And there's no browser automation, there's no handing over your passwords. And so some sites are using that, and not all the banks support it. But yeah, definitely if you're looking at some sort of integration to kind of collect payments and sick of having to charge credit card fees, maybe this is a good option for your company instead of something that takes people's username and passwords and makes them hand that over. The other thing is, I guess, more getting back to sort of my use case is there is sort of a bit of an open banking sort of future in New Zealand. They say Europe had, back in 2013, sort of introduced all their sort of payment service directive thing, which is all about sort of requiring banks and financial institutions to sort of implement these APIs. New Zealand is catching up. We've got an industry body. I don't know a ton about Payments NZ, but they've got some minimum open banking standards that all the banks sort of have to slowly implement. And the idea is that these are not APIs that you and I would sort of use, but companies like Akahu or other. I mean, we might use it at work, but you're not going to personally be able to use these APIs. So these other companies would be able to kind of consume these APIs and make the agreements with the banks and go through the testing phase with the banks. So it's still quite a big thing to kind of hook that up, but But the fact is the APIs are becoming a thing, which is good. So there's two main APIs at the moment. There's a payment initiation API, which I guess is just if you want to be able to pay someone, you could, I don't know exactly how it would work, but I guess you'd be able to sort of let an API, let some sort of third-party company make payments from you'd probably still have to authorize them, but be able to kind of kick off a payment. And that is meant to be ready for all banks at the moment, except KiwiBank, who need like another 2 years. And then there's an account information API, which is the one I'm more interested in, that apparently by the end of November 2024, all the major banks, except for KiwiBank, need to support version 2.1 of this sort of API standard. And that'll be cool because it's kind of read-only access to sort of like a bunch of transaction data, balances, statements, that sort of thing. And with these, you're in control of whether you let a third party access this data or how much data you want them to access. So rather than handing off your password, you're sort of saying, I want to let this company get access to this data and I guess control how they get your data. So I guess I wanted to kind of come back and think about the future of the budget sync app that I've got. Basically, I'm getting sick of having to sort of debug all these browser-based automation solutions that I've built. So I think I'm probably just going to integrate it with Akihu, which is why I've got so much Akihu-related content in here. But it's still a bit of an awkward one. Do I want to sort of hand my password over to this thing? But I guess knowing that they've kind of got that mobile API-based solution, it's a little bit better than what I'm doing now. I guess the benefit for me now is knowing that I'm in control of the code and the server that runs the code, but it's still a computer that has access to that password and could be compromised. So yeah, their integrations that they've got sort of do help. It means I don't need to go and build another bank integration every time I change banks, because I seem to do that too often. And they've got integrations with companies like Wise and things like that. So that's good. And eventually they'll be able to kind of help me kind of make use of those proper new bank APIs. That would be great. That's really all I had. So basically, pretty much all the sort of current solutions to get sort of banking data are pretty average. A lot of them sort of break your bank's terms and conditions because you have to kind of give out your password. But these better APIs are on the way. It's just taking a bit of time, especially KiwiBank. And yeah, if you are looking for sort of a low-cost solution to kind of collect payments and don't want to use credit cards, then maybe see if you can integrate with something like online FPOS rather than something that takes people's username and passwords. And for me, I think it's pretty much time to sort of hang up my DIY browser automation boots. I think it's time to just stick with a good API solution that's out there and hope that it improves over time. So yeah, that is me. Any questions? I hope I wasn't too quick. Hello, Ben.
Did you try and find out what the consequences of breaking your bank's terms and conditions are?
Not really. I think because I did email the people at Akihu as well, and they talked about how a lot of the banks will say things like that, but then ultimately do take measures not to block these things. They know that they happen. Apparently, one of the banks did have like a nice like hidden field that you could insert into the page to say I'm Polly, and it would sort of let the Polly system in. So I think they know that they exist. Like, of course, they know that it's going on. And I guess if something went wrong, then maybe they'd be able to say, "Oh, sorry, we don't support this." But yeah, I think basically they know that everything's a bit messy without APIs. So yeah, hopefully they would support things if things happen, but I guess there's no guarantees.
I was thinking more financially, whereas now that you've given away your login details to somebody else, you are no longer able to say, "Oh no, I've been a victim of fraud." The bank will go, "Yeah."
It is possible. I know I used to use a jailbroken iPhone, and if you installed the ANZ app on it, it would detect that you're jailbroken, and it would say you're on your own. If you get attacked somehow, we're not going to support you. So yeah, I haven't seen anything like that to sort of say we know what you're doing. But yeah, in theory, they probably do have some record of that, right? To say, if we see something funky going on, we can opt out of helping maybe. But yeah, so that's interesting.
I remember my wife used to work at BNZ and said that it's something like that. Yeah, I think you get less cover if something did happen.
I've got a big X next to my name. I think like this thing logging into my bank 3 times a day for the last 5 years. But yeah.
Do you know if the banking API in November includes like pay person-to-person transactions?
I don't know actually, because there was one that the payment initiation API was meant to be kind of ready now-ish. So, well, it would make sense that it would, right? Because you can imagine something like TradeMe, right? It'd be great if you could just say, here's my bank account number, and I want to, pay for this TradeMe purchase, and it could just be like, oh, we'll just,
Manager, but also then no more, cost pay away fees, which
yeah.
make no sense.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how it would work. Yeah, like if you're paying for stuff like at a shop or something, I don't know if that would. I mean, I guess someone could build a solution.
You have apps that you can pay phone to phone.
Oh, true.
Other countries have.
True.
So you can just like pay to a merchant and don't need a special POS machine.
Oh yeah, true. Right. I didn't even think of that aspect. I'm so like ingrained in the banking system to be like, but it still need to go through. But like totally, you could just pay the merchant, right?
Like a log into your bank app transfer, it can be like a phone to phone.
Yeah.
It's connected to your credit card, and then by phone number you just transfer from one person to another. But someone needs to do that here. It's impossible here to collect money.
Yeah. I think I did hear that BNZ was working on their own sort of person-to-person app, like trying to, I guess, get adoption of a new app to do that. But yeah, I guess ultimately it's like a bank trying to be in the middle of it. But
I think BNZ were the first to do the open banking API stuff.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing. Like Akahu's talked about that and how they were ready a long time ago with these APIs, but they're still not at the point where they've been able to connect up to it yet. Even so, it's going to take a while. I think all these things to kind of. Yeah, and I think like maybe with all the other banks kind of hopefully finishing by the end of the month, they're meant to be, maybe that'll kind of speed them along. But KiwiBank's still got another 2 years, so I have a KiwiBank account, so I might, that's going to take a while. But yeah.
I have heard stories. It's actually harder than you think it is.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
The payment one is actually the easier one of the two, which was always surprised me. Apparently, when you have to connect to a mainframe, things get hard.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it probably, all these very old systems, and I think it's just neat that it's sort of like standardized API it'll be good to have something to kind of bring us back into the sort of the future of it.
Do you know how Xero gets all of that information?
I'm not sure. I think that was Xero, you said, right? Yeah, I think that they have, maybe they're big enough that they've actually kind of like negotiated with banks directly, because I know that some of the banks, like I know that like ANZ used to have a button to like connect to Xero, and so I feel like maybe years ago they've just kind of gone, we're big enough and we're, that you should build an integration and talk to us. But as far, I think maybe I did see them on like listed on the API Center, like Payments NZ API Center website as like a registered third party that would want to consume these APIs. But I just feel like they've been able to negotiate with banks directly a bit, because I guess if you don't want to be the one bank that can't link to Xero. But yeah, I guess it's just for the rest of us, like everyday people, to try and, we're not important enough to get banks to get these integrations built. Any other questions?
How behind is New Zealand then in terms of the API being introduced?
I don't really know, to be honest. I know that obviously in Europe, like it's being regularly used, and there's like companies that you can connect to that just connect to all the banks over there and things. So maybe, I don't know. I think Australia might be okay-ish in this space as well. I don't know how it compares to New Zealand, but I know that Poly is actually an Australian company. Like was owned by Australia Post, and they've stopped operating in Australia, but they're still operating here doing payments. And maybe they're that much more advanced in Australia, they don't need that. But don't know, to be honest. Any other questions?
I'd always heard that the web payment stuff is really insecure. I never really thought about it. until you kind of talked about it. And yeah, it's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, I know the banks have been doing a lot of pushes lately to be, talking about fraud and things. Like pretty much all of them have been talking about this, but yeah, I haven't seen any active don't use
for them
solutions.
To still not have APIs for payments is kind of
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just exposing people to fraud for online payment.
I think maybe now that they're becoming a bit more available, maybe they can sort of say, hey, we've got these things now, you're just not using them. But yeah, I guess for end consumers, it's if they're not given another option, I guess they're kind of stuck with whatever's presented on. Yeah, so hopefully things like online FPOS will be good. I'm just got no hope of QBank supporting it anytime soon. But
what people often a doctor offers poly, but not credit card.
That's
a doctor offering poly. That's weird.
It's my health pool.
Oh, okay.
Not
Yeah.
the doctor specific.
Yeah. Interesting.
Don't you normally just pass on the fees to people if you want to anyway? So
Yeah,
with people that here's the surcharge and money I should.
So, thank you, everyone. I think we've still got a little, 10 minutes until the pizza arrives. So, if there's any other questions? Otherwise, I guess just enjoy until the pizza arrives. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.